the theme of the session today will be about how we can build supply chain resilience and, most importantly, sustainable supply chains. But, I am going to start this session with a kind of surprising approach. I'm going to tell you about a childhood dream. So when I was a child, I was dreaming to become an archaeologist because I love history. And I took this picture in January 2020, just before COVID. I was on a trip with my son to Egypt, to Upper Egypt in Luxor. And we went and visited the temple of Dendera, dedicated to the goddess Hathor. And what really surprised me are the inscriptions on the ceiling. And when I asked the guide, what are these inscriptions, he told me that these are for the first zodiac. And actually, the first zodiac was invented by the Egyptians several thousand years ago in Dendera. So what was this zodiac used for? The Egyptians used it to be able to predict if there will be enough water, if the Nile River will be at its normal level, if there will be a drought, if there will be a war, for example. So the idea of business predictions actually is not really something new if you think about it. And even returning to the zodiac was important because it allowed them to know what's the quantity of grains or crops that they needed to store in case of war, for example, or a natural disaster. So under what form and in which location. So if you think of it, the concept of multi-echelon inventory optimization is more than 2,000 years old. Now, coming to the present, yesterday I was coming from Paris to London with the Eurostar, and I said, okay, let me look at the latest supply chain trends. And here I found everything about supply chain predictions. Gartner predicts the future of supply chain technology. Forbes also has its own predictions, Bain & Co., all the big names. McKinsey also is telling us about how we can future-proof the supply chain. And you can see, as many publications as you want, 14 supply chain predictions, 7, I've seen 3, 1, 2, the number that you want. And guess what? Even Hello Magazine has its own prediction. And they are trying to predict who will win the Oscars this year. So the question is, why do we need all a crystal ball? Okay. Well, the truth is we are living in an era where disruption is the new norm. And your supply chains are under attack. There are different reasons, so it can be the spike in energy prices, okay, or the human rights violations in some countries. So, because maybe some part of this suit that I'm wearing went into child labor, and we don't want this to happen, or some of the food that we are eating, its supply chain went through some, kind of child labor or, other kind of human right abuse. We are also facing the climate change and all the issues related to climate warming, plus the global trade war between China and the US, and now the war in Ukraine, etc. So there is no need to remind you about all what's happening as disruptions. Forget COVID. I'm not going to talk about COVID because it's already déjà vu. Now, what we've learned after working with thousands of customers is the following. And we've learned with global leaders such as IKEA, AstraZeneca, so Tesco, Cisco, Microsoft in supply chain. What we've learned is the following, that a generational shift is upon us and uncertainty is the new norm. And there are tough questions that the different business leaders are asking. So from a CFO perspective, the first question I ask is the following. If I want to address uncertainty, how will I be able to finance my company? Okay? How am I going to do planning and budgeting? At which frequency to be able to respond to the market volatility? From a supply chain perspective, and we've seen that during the past 3 years, the world witnessed the highest numbers of mergers and acquisitions. The main question is the following, and we're hearing a lot of customers coming to us. Well, they grew through different mergers and acquisitions, and they inherited different supply chains. So now we're working with a major automotive company, and in the UK, they have centers or warehouses inherited from 2 different, other automotive conglomerates. So the business question here is, which hubs or which warehouses are we going to maintain? Which warehouses are we going to close? And same, maybe which plants are we going to close or to relocate? Shall we do offshoring or do nearshoring to address the risk that is coming from China, for example? Another question is from the head of sales. How can we address the demand, make sure that we are able to increase revenue, but also make sure that our supply can't meet demand? Because we've seen that during COVID until today, we have a lot of shortages of goods in the supermarkets, for example. Okay? Now, the ugly truth is the following, and I'm not referring to the movie, I'm referring to these statistics. 80% of CEOs say that it takes too much time to take decisions, 80%. And 74% are not ready for what is next. And this is not me telling this is McKinsey study, okay? And if we do a zoom on the pace of change of what's happening today, we can see that the pace of change is growing exponentially. So it's due to the accelerated disruptions, it's due to the volatility and uncertainty, but it's also due to the shifting consumers' behavior. For example, with COVID, we've seen a huge move to the online shopping. It's also due to the new technology advancements, to increasing competition, and also to new regulations such as environmental, safety, and human rights regulations. Now, this is nice, and I'm not telling anything new, okay? What's new is the following. The reality is that the ability of companies to respond to these changes is not following. And there is a huge gap between the pace of change and the ability of companies to respond. And this is mainly due to the legacy, old IT infrastructure, to lack of skills and budgets, etc. And this is what we call the acceleration gap. So the big question today, how can we bridge this gap? Okay? So closing the gap requires a paradigm shift. And in terms of supply chain, it is not anymore a nice to have, what we call continuous supply chain modeling and optimization. Today, it's a question of life or death. There is a big sense of urgency to embrace what we call the continuous supply chain design or the continuous supply chain recalibration to cater for uncertainty and to allow supply chains to be resilient and sustainable. Okay? So we witnessed that there are different leaders and outperformers who are able to bridge this gap. And instead of going and show you, different features, what we can do, I'm going to tell you a story. And this story is about a leader in medical equipment devices. So they are a global leader in the manufacturing of pacemakers and different type of equipment devices. You can read their story in Forbes magazine. It's available publicly. And the story is how their digital twin helped them support the ability to respond during the pandemic. So I'm going to tell you a story. The story started, a while ago, and I want to show you here the complexity of supply chains. This is a typical supply chain of a global company. Well, this company has more than 250,000 finished products. They are operating in 150 countries, and they have more than 60,000 shipments a day. So it is a big scale. And the story starts with the following. They had a data nightmare. And today, if I ask you, and what we are witnessing with our customers, well, in many cases, they are running different instances of ERPs. It can be SAP Oracle. They may be using both with different deployment mode, on-premise, in the cloud. They may be using in-house developed systems. And sometimes data simply might not exist. So we are not in a perfect world where the data exists and we have this luxury. So we need to do something. What this company did, starting 2015, so following different mergers and acquisitions, they adopted what we called the network optimization. So the network optimization allowed us to model their network of suppliers, of manufacturing plants, of distribution centers, and they were able to optimize this physical network and the flow of products in the network, okay? Then, before COVID hit, in 2019, they decided that they want to solve their data problem. So what they did, they built what we call a supply chain digital twin. Later on, I'm going to do a demo about the supply chain digital twin because it is a big buzzword. But the idea here is that simply the digital twin is a digital representation of a physical supply chain. It's like the digital twin of a body or of a car. It's the same for the supply chain. So this was very good because what they did, they anticipated a major disruption, which was COVID. So when COVID hit in early 2020, there was a big problem. First of all, this is a company with 90,000 employees. So they were under huge pressure because their first priority was to address the safety of their own employees. Second, they had to work remotely, and they were not used to working remotely. And guess what? From a day to another, there was a huge decrease in the demand of elective surgery equipment and a full spike in the demand of respiratory equipment to treat COVID. And from my personal relationship, I know that it's not only about the plastic surgeries that went down, but all kinds of elective surgery. I had to do at that time a minor surgery that I delayed till 2022 because I didn't want to go to the hospital and catch COVID. But the story doesn't end here. Actually, it is only the beginning of the story. Do you know why? Any idea? Well, I will tell you why. When the economies reopened in 2022, the opposite happened. There was a huge decrease in the demand of respiratory products and a spike in the demand for elective surgery equipments. And everyone wanted to do the surgeries that were in a huge backlog. So again, this company had to readapt and recalibrate its supply chain to meet the shifting demand. That's nice, but then the war in Ukraine came, and this company operates in China, in Asia Pacific, in the US, and in Europe. So all that transportation that was going through the Russian or Ukrainian airspace were disrupted, and they had to find alternatives for their transportation. So la morale de l'histoire is the following. Today, the disruptions did not stop. There are new regulations, new trade laws, etc. And as I mentioned, the new norm is that there is no norm at all. And when the stakes are high, we need to be able to take action quickly, and it should be very quick. So this is our first story. I want to tell you another story through a customer testimonial, which is a British-Swedish company. It's AstraZeneca. So let me go and play the video. 1 second. So it's an interview with the head of supply chain of AstraZeneca, explaining how the supply chain modeling and optimization is helping us ensure business continuity.
AstraZeneca, I work in global supply chain strategy. Most of my time now is spent on long-term capacity modeling. And so looking at the 10-year horizon, looking at demand, supply, and building out a plan of are we fit for purpose for the next 10 years. Getting quality data and putting it into a model or a view that you can feel comfortable with, both not just as a customer within global supply, but the senior stakeholders as well, is the biggest challenge that we have a lot of data we need to filter through to get to a true purpose of what the information will give us from a supply chain answer. For us, Data Guru has been a real positive impact in taking the information that we have, filtering it out, doing some validation steps, and then from the modeling side as well, once that data gives us a baseline, we get asked, what if we change this demand? What if we move these products and assets to these locations? What does that do to the answer that we want to achieve? So by better quality data in, we get better quality data out. From a time savings, we've been 50% in turnaround at minimum there. From a cost perspective, we've taken an asset of $30 million out of the equation from the capital planning that we thought we needed by running some risk-based scenarios, by running all these different what-ifs. We really could get confidence from Supply Chain Guru, from Data Guru software, to our senior stakeholders to say, we believe that we don't need this asset now, and so we can take it out of the capital plan.
Good, so this is a nice testimonial how Coupa Supply Chain Design and Planning, which is powered by LlamaSoft, because Coupa acquired LlamaSoft a couple of years ago, and this is a solution that we are using to do our supply chain design and planning. Okay. Now I want to go back to the core topic of the presentation. Okay, so what is supply chain resiliency? Supply chain resiliency, as defined by Gartner, is the ability of an organization to avoid, absorb, and recover from the business impact of major disruptions through a risk-balanced approach to product, supply chain strategy, and network design. So this is the latest definition from Gartner, but actually Charles Darwin had his own definition almost 150 years ago. It's all about agility and adaptability, and as Charles Darwin mentioned, it is not the strongest species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the most responsive to change. So in summary, this is the resiliency. What about sustainability? Sustainability has three main pillars. First, it is the pillar of the humans. So it's the chapter of addressing human rights, the health and safety at work, the non-discrimination when it comes to gender equality, ethnicity protection, etc., diversity and inclusion, etc. Then you have the protection of the environment, whether through the minimizing the carbon emissions, the liquid waste, or the solid waste, or any kind of pollution. And third, definitely, to have sustainable companies, there should be a financial viability. So the economic aspect is critical. Where sustainability is important is that the financial practices should be ethical, and there is a governance structure to address everything related to anti-bribery and anti-corruption. In summary, these are the definitions of resilience and sustainability. Now we're talking about new ESG regulations. And here, I must confess that Germany is leading the way in this perspective. Last year, they issued a law that went into force, in January 2023. It is called the Lieferkettengesetz, or the German Supply Chain Act. And this Supply Chain Act requires companies to respect human rights and environmental protection, not only within the scope of the company's operations itself, but within all tiers of the supply chain. So I'll give you an example. If today I am Nike, I'm manufacturing running shoes, I have suppliers in Thailand, and these suppliers in Thailand have suppliers in Vietnam, in China, in Bangladesh. I cannot say that, well, I did my due diligence and I am very happy with my first-tier suppliers, and the problem, if the second, third, or fourth tier of suppliers are not respecting human rights or the environment, then it's not my problem. Well, this is not anymore with the German Supply Chain Act. So this is a huge shift in regulations. And the difference with previous laws, because there were previous laws that were more of sentimental laws without really sanctions, this law has very severe sanctions on corporations and on multinationals with a certain annual turnover. And this is starting in Germany, but we are observing the laws in the EU. And the EU is going step by step to a similar regulation. Now, if we look globally, and this is a study from KPMG about the sustainability regulations, there is a good news. Well, the UK is leading the way, even when it comes to environment, social, or governance. Europe is also very committed, but unfortunately, as you can see, the US is lacking behind when it comes to ESG regulations. Okay? But there is something that today companies are not waiting to have laws to be compliant with sustainability standards. Many companies, if you take today Nike, AstraZeneca, GSK, etc., they have their own sustainability program that can be far beyond the sole scope of compliance. So a month ago, I was in discussion with the head of legal at Total Energies. Total Energies is one of the global leaders of oil and gas and renewable energies. And the head of compliance told me, well, Rabih, today it's not for us, compliance, it's not the problem. For example, if we have a supplier who is involved in child labor, the solution might not be to stop working with the supplier. The solution, because if you stop child labor in Bangladesh, these children will be in a worse condition in the street. So what Total Energies is doing, they are having community programs where they are sponsoring education programs for the children, and having other persons from the family of the children to get trained and work for them. So there is a huge social community aspect that is coming in place, okay? But the idea, or if I want you to retain one thing, that today there is no avoidance or escape from the human right and environmental and social aspects for corporations, okay? And so what we do at Coupa. At Coupa, traditionally, the head of the leaders, the business leaders, used to come to us and to tell us how can we redesign our supply chain to reduce cost, okay? To reduce cost or maximize the profit, increase the revenue. How can we improve the service level? How can we optimize the working capital? But more and more, business leaders are coming to us to see how they can reinvent their supply chain to mitigate risk and address sustainability and environmental issues, okay? So at Coupa, the heart of Coupa supply chain design and planning is what we call continuous design, continuous supply chain design. So what is continuous supply chain design? What I am representing here is the following. So you have the execution systems like Oracle, SAP, Sage. The ERP systems sit here in the execution part. Same for the transportation execution systems. And you have also the planning and sales and operations systems that sit on top of these execution systems. In the old days, like 10 years ago, the offering of Lamasoft was here mainly in supply chain design, but it was more of an episodic supply chain design. Now companies cannot afford anymore to do the design of their supply chain every 2 or 3 years, or to optimize their inventory every 2 or 3 years, or their transportation. This is becoming a necessity to be done on a continuous basis. So today, we need Coupa supply chain design and planning to be able to formulate the optimized policies, the optimized network design, the optimized transportation policies, and to feed the systems like Oracle and SAP, but at the same time to be able to get fed by real data and then to recalibrate again the model. And this is what we call the continuous design. And it's critical because many customers come to us and say, well, we don't know what we do. We want to have an execution system, but we don't have an optimization system. Well, I want to tell you something. 80% of your supply chain spend is already locked when you design it. So if you have the design wrong, and you do your ERP, you can execute very well, but you'll be missing a big part of the equation. Okay. And what we offer today at Coupa is a catalog of different use cases. For example, how we can optimize our network, how we can also address taxes and duties to minimize these costs regionally or globally. And also we address, let's say, tactical issues and not only strategic issues such as transportation mode selection, transportation optimization, vehicle routing, fleet sizing. And as I mentioned, today sustainability and risk are top on the agenda. And today, I will come back to risk. Companies are facing different types of third-party risk. So this can be an environmental risk, a compliance risk, a country risk, a financial, a judiciary risk, and we are seeing a high number of new regulations when it comes to risk mitigation. And with no further ado, because I think that now you are bored with PowerPoints, I'm going to jump into the product directly and demo what is a digital twin and how we can de-risk or mitigate risk in Coupa supply chain design and planning. So this is a map of the world. And what we are going to do is to represent the supply chain. First, we can represent the different sites. So these are the suppliers, the triangles. We can see also different manufacturing plants. And also you have distribution centers in different parts of the world. We can show the inter-site flows. For example, this supplier in Bulgaria is supplying the plant in Romania, okay? And this plant in Romania is servicing this distribution center here in Italy. What else we can do? We can represent the customer that we are servicing and the customer flows, okay? And you have all the layers, all the legend that you can tailor to your needs, so you can change the way you represent the different entities, okay? But that's not all the story. This is not a digital twin. A digital twin is definitely this digital representation of the physical network, but it's also the digital representation of the data and information flow. And this includes the economic data, so the cost, the revenue, the profit. It contains the carbon emissions data, the risk data, and any type of data that you want to capture. So what I'm showing you here is simply a baseline. A baseline is a snapshot. It's a picture of a current supply chain as is. And for this company, which has a very typical supply chain with companies in China and in the Far East and suppliers all over the world, then this company is, for example, doing a first manufacturing stage in China and Thailand, then sending the semi-finished products to Europe for finishing plants in Hungary and in Belgium. And then the finished products are routed to distribution centers and to the customers in Europe. What we are going to show you is the risk related to the different suppliers. So here we have the different suppliers that we have in our supply chain, and I am going to sort them by the highest residual score. So we can see that the supplier in China has the highest risk. It's 90%, and the supplier in South Africa has an 85% of risk. And we are not happy with it because we don't want to be dealing with risky suppliers. Now, in this scenario, what we are going to do, we are saying that we want to do a scenario and see what will be the impact on the supply chain if we stop working with the suppliers in China and in South Africa. And let me show you the results. So on the right side of the screen, you can see the new supply chain where we are not working anymore with the supplier in South Africa. And we are not working anymore with a supplier in Beijing, okay? The baseline is on the left. You can see the supplier in Beijing is operational, and the one in South Africa is operational. So what happened, the solver used mathematical algorithms to reduce the risk, but also to optimize the supply chain while reducing cost. So bear in mind, we want to reduce the risk, but we don't want to do it at the expense of cost. At the end of the day, we want to remain profitable. And what happened, the solver in the second scenario is suggesting to close the factory in Thailand. You can see that the factory in Thailand is not operational anymore, and to open a new plant in Romania. And you can have all the details when it comes to the cost represented here. So I'm going to show the summary. In the baseline, we have 57 million of total cost of the supply chain. We also modeled the CO2. We had 15,000 tons of CO2 emitted. for a risk score of the suppliers, an average supplier residual score of 57. Now I'm moving directly to the final scenario here. So we can see that the cost of the supply chain increased slightly. The risk got reduced to 40 instead of 57. And we have a very nice collateral beauty, which is a reduction in CO2 emissions, simply because when we are doing a nearshoring and manufacturing in Romania, the transportation emissions are much lower. And also we can run scenarios. For example, in the previous model, we had one distribution center in the UK that is servicing all the customers in the UK. But guess what? What happens if there is a major electricity outage in this distribution center? Will you allow it that you won't be able to service your customers in the UK? Of course not. So you might decide to open another DC in the UK to reduce the risk. And you have all the numbers and all the visuals representing how this risk is mitigated. Now, what I suggest, if you are interested in seeing more details about the setup of the demo, from where we capture the data, how we do the modeling and optimization, you are all welcome to join us at the Coupa booth. Also, I will be very happy to do with my colleagues a demo of the carbon digital twin to show you how we can do a carbon model and optimize the carbon emissions and reduce them in the supply chain. Now, I want to go back to the presentation and skip something because we're running out of time. So before concluding, I have a quiz for you. So the first question is, do you think this is a digital twin? Yes? No? Okay, actually, the answer is no and yes, if you want. So this autoportrait from Dali in the 40s, actually it's a good starting point for a digital twin because it's a baseline. When he painted the Mona Lisa, this was his mood, okay, at that time. But it is not actually a dynamic digital twin that evolved with time. So though it earned him immortality, but it's still debatable. And the other question is, would you exercise once a year to become fit? Yes? No? Okay, of course. So definitely no. And this is why we need the continuous design. And I remember in May, I was on my bike in Paris, and there was the Red Bull cliff diving. It was really amazing and free of charge to attend. So when I watched these athletes do their diving, I was impressed. And actually, they do exercise continuously. And the same, if I want you to remember one thing, if you want to be resilient and have sustainable supply chains, you need to exercise and recalibrate, reinvent these supply chains on a continuous basis. And with this, we reach the end of the session. Thank you. So again, you're welcome to join us at the booth. And if you want to contact me, you can join me on LinkedIn or on my email address. Thank you.